In this video, I'd like to discuss some legal issues to consider when negotiating the purchase or licensing of third-party software. I am a lawyer, as well as software and database developer and DBA. I actively practiced law for 13 years, and although I'm still a member of the Missouri Bar, I am not currently engaged in the practice of law. When I was employed as an attorney by St. Louis County, Missouri, I negotiated many kinds of contracts. Contracts for construction of golf courses, purchase of mainframes, purchase of helicopters, but also software purchases and licenses, and software support agreements. Please be aware that while I am discussing the law in this video, I am not your lawyer. This is not legal advice upon which you can rely. You should engage your own lawyer to negotiate these terms for you and have him or her watch this video. The recommendations I'm making are applicable to shrink-wrapped software as well as custom software written specifically for your organization. I am using the term shrink-wrapped rather loosely to include software that is already written that you are buying to satisfy some need of your organization. If it costs you a lot of money, you should demand that the terms of the contract be negotiated. You're probably not going to be able to negotiate terms for, say, Microsoft Word unless you are purchasing huge amounts of licenses, and this, in fact, is done by Fortune 500-sized companies. As a matter of fact, they have specialized versions of Microsoft Word or Excel, perhaps, that have their company logo embedded in them and provide certain functions that are not available in the publicly available software and perhaps would be even meaningless for the publicly available software. Although I am mentioning software here, many of these issues, most, maybe all of these issues, also apply to the purchase or licensing and support of hardware. When we negotiate these contract terms, we have to be aware that there is sale and licensing as well as support contracts. And we should not forget those support contracts because very often they are as important or more important than the terms of the actual sale or license. First of all, you should remember that whatever program you purchase or license that you are going to use to entrust your company's data, you own the data. All agreements must acknowledge this as well as the consequences of your ownership of the data. The application must be able to export your data to a format usable by you or technicians you designate. That might be comma-separated value files, XML, or whatever is appropriate considering the application and the data. The exported data must not be encoded or dependent upon proprietary code or tools which the vendor will not share with you. Although I haven't experienced this, I have seen examples on the internet where a failure of a relationship with a vendor has resulted in some very nasty situations, and these should be addressed from the very beginning. Immediately, from the start of the contract, even if you don't need it exported right then, the application must be able to do it, and that should continue forever. The application must be able to export your data whether or not the vendor is in breach of the contract. It shouldn't be triggered by some event in the future. And you should be able to export your data whether or not you have a support contract in effect at the time you wish to export the data. That should be a term of the original agreement. The contract should specify what business you're in and what the software is intended to do. It shouldn't be assumed that it's obvious. Now, when you specify what the software is intended to do, there are two types of specifications: technical specifications and functional specifications. And I'm not going to go in those in this video nearly as deeply as I should. I recommend that you search the internet for technical versus functional specifications and familiarize yourself with the difference there until you're comfortable that you understand what the distinction is. Technical specifications for the performance of software generally involve metrics, such as the maximum capacity of the application or the resolution of graphic output. Functional specifications have to do with what you intend to do with it, what you intend to accomplish. You should run the application, see what it does, and determine whether, for example, specific identified pages load within a required period of time with a specified number of users and a specified number of relevant objects in the database, if there is a database, and there usually is one. So you should be able to do something where there are 50 concurrent users with 10,000 customers and 1 million orders. Or you need to determine what sorts of specification of the function will determine whether it's usable or not. This distinction is very important. I have many times seen situations where technical specifications are satisfied, detailed technical specifications are satisfied, but the product is still unusable because it doesn't accomplish the purpose for which it was purchased or licensed. For example, I saw a contract for hospital records software and hardware to have a database for patient records. And it had an enormous number of technical specifications about all sorts of things. And yet, it still couldn't search for a record fast enough to make it usable. That search time was not part of the specifications. That's a functional specifications, and all that contract had was technical specifications. The hospital was left holding the bag. You need to force yourself to go through the process of writing technical and functional specifications in any event. And the reason is that I have seen too many examples of software that was purchased that could not possibly satisfy the needs of the organization. Often this is the result of some executive being impressed by some salesman, and the users are subject matter experts within an organization, and they're not even consulted. Believe me, this occurs so often that it is absurd. The contract should specify what the vendor must do to attempt to remedy a situation if the application cannot meet the technical and functional specifications. For example, if a third party, such as myself as a database troubleshooter, recommends additional indexing, this often is considered to be invalidation of a service agreement, and so you can't implement a fix even if you know what it is. You should also have a contract that permits the disabling of unused functionality which is using resources. In another video, I mentioned an application that had 40,000 users where there was a page life expectancy of 4 seconds. There were two things that could have improved that. One is the addition of an index, which when added many months later, increased the page life expectancy to 700 seconds. And another, which was the disabling of an unused stored procedure that modified no data and whose output was not used by anything. If this stored procedure had been disabled, I am confident that that application running on the existing hardware could have supported 100,000 users. The vendor often attempts to invoke excuses for the software not being usable. For instance, that you are using the software in a manner for which it was not intended, or you're using it in a way such that the distribution of data is not handled by the indexes and design of the application. Before purchasing or licensing the software, the vendor must acknowledge that it understands your business and how you're going to use the software, and that it is usable for your intended purpose. In their boilerplate contracts, they're going to specifically exclude these things. You must negotiate to get it in. Now, if we're talking about expensive software, they should be amenable to that before they get your money. It is my opinion that if you are not willing to walk away from a contract, you have a very limited negotiating position. In the event that the software is only part of a solution, but that all of these parts have to work together, the vendor must agree to cooperate with troubleshooting. In the troubleshooting I've done in such situations, the question is, where is the time that is being wasted or which is excessive? Where is that being spent? Is it being spent in the application, at the client end, in a middle tier web server or object server, or in the database? My experience is people automatically blame the database, and that very often is not the case. And if you want an example of this, you might view my video on my 2 favorite wait stats. The problem comes in getting the vendor to provide information about the internal working of their proprietary software, which helps you determine whether they are at fault. The vendor must be able to provide or create performance diagnostics showing how much time is spent performing its software as part of the whole process. This means, especially in the case of custom-written software, that they have to be able to put in some code that writes various time markers for different operations to some database so you can see what time is being spent where. If they're not willing to do this, I would not advise purchasing or licensing their software or entering into a service agreement with them. The remedy is very often going to be, once you cannot be satisfied, to have the vendor take their product out of your system and give you your money back. Now, they're probably going to have provisions in their contract that they're not going to be liable for anything beyond your payments to them. And in my experience, you're probably not going to be able to get around that. But this is the least you can do. This remedy may not be as important as the previous provisions where you got them to agree to what to do to make the software work. You don't want them to take it out and give you your money back. You want it to work, so that's where the focus has to be. Now, you may have some experiences where you installed some third-party software and were unsatisfied with the cooperation that you got from the vendor or the fix that you got from the vendor. I'm going to recommend that you enter summaries of those situations in the comments below, and then I can make another video or remake this one incorporating those issues and perhaps recommending some solutions so that you can get what you want in similar situations in the future. If you find this video helpful, please like, share, comment, subscribe as you see fit. Thank you.